This poem that I'm going to read now is one that is kind of an autobiography of me, and so it's sort of long because I'm pretty old. But it's I probably should explain that I had kind of an unusual childhood in that I was born in Japan, lived there until I was 5, then we moved to North Carolina, and when I was in 7th grade, we spent a year in India. So when the unusual thing of it, I guess, which some of you may have had this experience if you've lived overseas, you expect to have culture shock when you go to another country, but you don't necessarily expect to have this reverse culture shock that you may experience when you come back. And that was what happened to me as an 8th grader coming back to the United States after spending a year in Benares, India, which is the Hindu holy city. It's where people go to be cremated when they're dying because if you are cremated at that particular place on the Ganges River, they believe that you can then bypass the cycle of reincarnation. The year I was there was the year that the Beatles became popular and were on Ed Sullivan. And so when I came back, I didn't know who the Beatles were. And of course, and there were all kinds of slang expressions that I was totally clueless. So there's an element of that in this poem. It's called Self-Portrait as a House. In kindergarten, I drew a picture of a house. One red square with 2 square windows like eyes on either side of a brown door without a knob. Each window divided into 4 square panes, topped by a triangular roof like a folded newspaper hat. A black coil of smoke rising from the stovepipe chimney, and my name printed at the bottom in block letters, anchoring my house to earth, B-E-T-H, meaning house in Hebrew, which may explain why I collect miniature houses and line them up on shelves like Shinto shrines, and why there are houses embroidered on guest towels and a row of houses on the wallpaper border in my bathroom, and why a house was the one thing I wanted when I grew up. Not a diamond ring or car or Imelda Marcos' collection of spike-heel designer shoes, but a house, a symbolic extension of the self, a container for all the rooms of my life, beginning with the prefabricated house in Fukuoka. One night, the roof blew off during a typhoon. After that, we moved to a house where Japanese children pressed their noses against the windows, peering in at my sisters and me when we had to take naps after lunch. We hated going to sleep, so we'd jump on our beds and pretend to be sumo wrestlers by wedging our underpants up our butt cracks. I don't remember the house in Louisville where we lived when I was 3, but I recall the Campbell's kids on a soup label and eating Frosted Flakes and watching Howdy Doody on TV and taking a bath with a Clarabelle the Clown wash rag and the pink-eyed rabbit at the nursery school where my best friend was a girl named Jeannie and my boyfriend was a Chinese kid who accidentally hit me in the head with a brick. I had to have 3 stitches. After we moved back to the house in Fukuoka, I learned to print my name in English and practiced writing Japanese characters in a vertical line. When we moved to Wake Forest, we lived in a big white house with a wraparound porch. Once, some girls came over for a slumber party, and everyone was scared when they heard my father snoring downstairs, thinking it was Bluebeard's ghost. I shone a flashlight on the ceiling, slowly bringing a giant shadow hand down to grab them. I wrote my name on the wall inside my closet before we left for Benares, where we lived in a bungalow, where geckos clung to the walls with tiny suction cup feet, and a rat we nicknamed Ricky Tikki Tavi squeezed through drainage holes to my sister's bedroom at night. There were no screens on the windows to keep out mosquitoes and flies, no hot water, no refrigerator or oven, only a charcoal stove, where Abdul prepared our meals of water buffalo and mashed potatoes molded into swans with carrot slice beaks. Until we returned to the house in Wake Forest, where my name was still written on the closet wall, but the other 8th grade girls thought I was weird because I'd never heard of the Beatles and used the word queer to refer to anything odd or unusual. And when the boy sitting behind me said, eat me raw," I said, "Why would I want to do that?" thinking he was talking about some queer form of cannibalism practiced in redneck regions of the Appalachians, which only encouraged him to keep pestering me until we moved to the brick split-level house in Raleigh. I had a basement room with a twin bed and small maple desk where I wrote poetry late at night instead of studying for chemistry tests, secretly wishing my name was melodious like Amelia Rose or Meredith, or French like Solange or Yvette, instead of Beth, a one-syllable name that can be uttered in a single breath. Beth, as stolid and plain as the four-square house with forest green shutters where I lived when my children were young, after a decade of dorm rooms and apartments before I was married. Once a drunk man at a bar said, "Baby, you're built like a brick shithouse." A backhanded compliment, I guess, since to be a house, even an outhouse, is to be grounded, rooted to earth. And I was ready to settle down and stay in one place, instead of traveling with only the contents of a suitcase and a map I never figured out how to read, even when I held it sideways to read the names of north-south streets that, like Japanese, are written vertically instead of left to right or east to west. The house in Chicago was on a one-way street, which made it hard to give directions to anyone who visited, but it had an old oak staircase I stripped to a Norwegian blonde sheen and an enclosed porch painted white with wicker chairs and plantation blinds that reminded me of the house in Wake Forest that I love best of all the houses I've lived in and left. Now I live in a blue house without geckos, rats, or ghosts, in a sleepy suburb where neighbors drive into attached garages and are never seen. This may be the last house I'll inhabit on earth, except for the house of flesh and bone I was given at birth, along with my name, Beth, a name that can be uttered in a single breath. In this house with charcoal gray shutters, in this house that rhymes with death. I was unhappily married when I wrote that, so it might have something to do with the rhyme at the end, I don't know. Because people always get to the end and they go, "Oh, death," you know, so. And I live in a log cabin now, so I'm probably going to have to write another poem about that. I'm going to read a poem about my trip back to Japan several years ago. I was there in 2006 and happened to be at the Atomic Bomb Museum on July the 4th, which is in Nagasaki. Nagasaki, July 4th, 2006. Rain falls on the Atomic Bomb Museum, where radiation-scarred angels from Urakami Cathedral weep behind glass with statues of headless saints, stained glass shards, a melted rosary, a charred rice bowl, a child's scorched robe, a steel helmet with the remains of a skull, a clock stopped by the blast. Rain falls on the shoreline, where a girl once drew circles in the sand, trying to remember her mother's face. On the earth where the dying cried for water, on a watchman's shadow burned into a wall, a twisted ladder leading to the sky, on the vault for the unclaimed remains of victims, a camellia tree that survived the flames, on the black cenotaph at Ground Zero, umbrellas blown inside out with wind. Rain falls on camphor trees at the Sano Shrine, on stones inscribed with names of the dead, a chain of 1,000 origami cranes, the statue of a mother and child, the fountain of peace where water flows in the wing beats of a dove, on the city where 70,000 people died. While school children pose for photographs, holding fingers up in a V of peace, North Korea fires 7 long-range missiles into the Japan Sea.